I'm sure you're not surprised. What is the difference between whole notes, half notes, and quarter notes? As you can see, a whole note is just a round circle. It's not shaded in. In my drawing, the whole note looks bigger, but actually on the page, it's the same size as the note head on a half. The only difference between these half notes and the whole note is that the half notes have a stem on them, and the whole note does not. The difference between the half notes and the quarter notes, as you can see, is that the quarter notes are shaded in. So that's how you tell those apart. Quarter notes can be divided into eighth notes. Sometimes you'll see eighth notes with what we call a beam connecting them. And other times you'll see them with what we call flags. These all mean the same thing. Each note head is one note. So this is 1/8 note, this is 1/8 note, this is 1/8 note, and this is 1/8 note. They're just written a little differently, but they mean the same thing. And we look at a note head. I point this out, sometimes I have line RA, but each note head is a separate note. Yes, 16th note. Again, beam them together, or we can write them with flags. It's the same thing. We could continue to add more beams. You notice the difference between an 8th note and a 16th note is that the 16th note has 2 beams, or 2 flags, while the 8th note only has 1. We can divide those further by adding more beams. And now these would be 32nd notes. And in fact, you might even run into 64th notes. However, 32nd notes are not so very common. We won't concern ourselves with them too much. Sometimes we combine different groupings of these kinds of notes as well. So, for example, you might see something like that. An 8th note with 2 16th notes. Altogether, they're worth 1/4 note. It doesn't matter that they're not all the same kind of note. We can combine them in any way as long as they add up to the right amount. And you'll understand that more when we cover time signatures, which is in the next chapter. A couple other things you might see with the notes. Sometimes you might see something like this. This is a triplet. The 3 above the beam here is an indication that you're going to have 3 8th notes in the amount of time you would normally have 2 8th notes. So if you think 2 8th notes are normally the length of a quarter note, now we're going to have 3 in the time of a quarter note. The difference would sound like this. If the 8th notes, then these are my triplets. Okay. Another thing you might see is a dot next to a note. A dot next to a note adds half of the original value. So in this case, this dot is worth an 8th note. If I had a dot next to an 8th note, now the dot is worth a 16th note. Every once in a while, you'll see a double dotted note. In this case, the second dot is worth half the value of the first dot. So, that might be a little confusing. This half note plus the dot, what's the dot going to be worth? A quarter note. And then this dot is going to be worth half of the quarter note. So this would be like a half note, a quarter note, and an eighth note all mixed together. What does that mean? That's how long that note lasts. So if I were singing, I would hold the note for that long. Sometimes, instead of using a dot, we use a tie. Like that. This tie also means to add the note values together. So that means I would hold this note for this entire time, for the length of a quarter note plus the length of a 16th note. There are a few different reasons why we would use ties instead of dots. You might think of a few, and get back to me on that. Okay. So we've got note values. Right now, I want to do a little exercise. I'm not sure how it's going to go on video, but we'll give it a try. I'm going to point to different notes, and I want you to try to clap along with that note value. I'll try to tap my pen against the board too. We're going to assume that we're going to be counting quarter notes. We're going to feel quarter notes as our pulse. Not that all music has quarter notes as a pulse, but we're just going to act like it does for right now. Just to practice getting a feel for what these different note values sound like. So we'll pretend like we're in a time where we have 4 quarter notes. I'm going to count to start off, and then I'll start pointing. You try to clap along with me with what I point at. We'll start simple, then we'll get more complicated. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2,